It is my honor to introduce our speaker tonight. It's Dr. Lauren Shaw. She serves as a GRIT program manager with Lida Hill Institute for Human Resilience. She holds a PhD in organizational psychology with a health and wellness specialization and a BS in human biology from UCCS. With a background in resilience training, mindfulness, and leadership development in military and organizational settings, she is also a certified health coach and personal trainer through ACE and NASM. So families, please join me in welcoming Dr. Lauren Shaw.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I appreciate that. Very happy to be here tonight. And thank you for taking time out this evening. I actually like evening trainings. I think it's a nice opportunity to unwind. If you're eating dinner, you don't have to worry about what you look like or eating, you can do messy eating. I do a lot of like lunch and learns, and people are eating and they're like so self-conscious about uh, they're eating and trying to listen, and you can just eat and or not eat and just be present. So thank you so much for having me. I'm guessing it's okay to go ahead and share the screen. Okay, you guys are good with that. All right, so let me go ahead and get my screen up. And we will get started. Okay. There we go. And so as I mentioned, I didn't mention this yet, but I'm going to mention it now. Are you guys just seeing my slide and not my notes? I always ask because sometimes my notes will be there as well. Are we good on just our main slide? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Aisha. So yes, I'm Dr. Lauren Shaw, and I'm with the Lida Hill Institute for Human Resilience. I'm going to present for you all tonight our GRIT training. And the really cool thing about this is that we are now offering this training live. And so you are one of probably, I guess we've done about 6 of these so far. And that means that you will have access to the training online. If you register tonight or at any time, you can register. You don't have to do it tonight, but it's a great opportunity to do that. And you are going to get the training, not in its entirety, but a good chunk of it. And then you can go back and reference any of the course materials later. So this is a great opportunity to do that. You will also, if you would like, receive a certificate at the end of the training. There is another QR code for that I will have. So this is a very condensed version of GRIT. And so a little bit about the Institute before I dive into the training, where this was developed, the training. The Lida Hill Institute for Human Resilience is part of UCCS, and we have 3 divisions at the Institute. Of course, our research division being very much connected to UCCS and researches around stress, trauma, and resilience. We have a healing division, which also takes some of that research and informs our therapeutic modalities. So we do offer counseling, therapy. We also have our Milestones Healing Center as well, which offers various alternative therapies. And we have our Community Training and Empowerment Division, which is where I come into play. So I am an organizational psychologist, and I go out into the community and talk about our brains and why our brains are so amazing and so simultaneously unhelpful. And I fully appreciate the dichotomy that exists there for those 2 things. So that said, tonight we are going to talk about resilience. We're going to talk about resilience from a different lens. So maybe you arrive to this training tonight thinking, "Great, that sounds like we're going to talk about, resilience from a personal lens." And it is very much that. However, the focus of GRIT is about social support, namely how we can have more helping conversations, more effective conversations around stress. So the folks that we are connected with in some way, shape, or form, we have some sort of relationship with, and we do these intentional check-ins and give people a space to open up and talk about stress. And so that is what GRIT is about. And there's more to it, of course, That is the little like teaser that I'm going to give you as we dive into it. Okay, so not going to do the introductions um, in terms of, I would like to do them, however, in the chat, if that's okay. So introductions, if you are comfortable sharing who you are, if you're want to say if you're affiliated with any organization or not, that's fine too. And then maybe what came up for you when you heard about this training? Was there something that, came to mind? Maybe what brought you here today? Maybe you are just taking it because, whatever reason. But just kind of curious what comes up for you, maybe even when you think about grit. So feel free to just pop that in the chat and I will kind of reference that. Whoops. Okay, there we go. I'm trying to have the chat going and but I have these great moderators. For some reason, my chat is like not being user friendly and letting me see. Um, it's like a huge chat. Let me minimize this. Okay, I think I got it. Okay, never mind. I'm good. We're good, you guys. Okay. So again, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and let's get to know each other a little bit here. So grit is again, as I mentioned, our resilience training that is about social support. I did not invent grit or develop grit. Grit was designed by these folks that I work with at the Institute. Namely, Dr. Chip Knight is our executive director at the Institute, and grit was his idea. And so, if you guys remember, back in March of 2020, this was a really interesting time in our lives. Lots of things were happening. Of course, this I'm speaking about the COVID-19 pandemic. And at that specific point in time, we were shutting down, right? We were like social distancing, businesses were closing, all the things, right? And so we didn't know at the time that eventually this was going to lead to, it was going to have some far reaching consequences, right? Especially around this notion of social distancing. So social distancing made sense for the most part. We needed to keep space between us so that we could, stay healthier, not, concerns of disease transmission, so on and so forth. However, as time went on, and we did not anticipate this for it to go on as long as it did, social distancing turned into social isolation, right? Because by virtue of this idea of we need to have space, we need to not be close, it sort of disconnected us, right, from each other. And so this was really profound. It had some pretty profound impacts on mental health and physical health, for that matter. So grit was designed initially to address the stress that we were experiencing during the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's social isolation. And it's all about how can we intentionally do these check-ins on people in our social circle, right? So this looks like friends, family, neighbors, coworkers, colleagues, people that we have some sort of baseline existing relationship with. That's not to say you could absolutely have a grit conversation with a stranger. I actually speak to this quite often, and I have had grit conversations with strangers. And we'll talk about the benefits of why it's helpful to know people, especially when we're building our awareness around the signs of stress. Okay, just want to highlight that grit is very much connected to Colorado Springs, and we are working with the city of Colorado Springs, specifically the mayor's initiative of the 1,000 neighborhood gatherings. And our goal is to become the first grit city. And we believe that this is definitely possible. However, we need folks to, help us along with this goal. So within the next 5 years, we would like to have 25,000 coaches. That seems like a big number, and it is, absolutely. However, just within the last year, the number of coaches that we've been seeing join the program has exponentially increased. So numbers, as far as our total numbers of coaches, we have 5,500 coaches, but that is globally, worldwide. So about half of those coaches are actually in El Paso County. So that's pretty awesome. And this really just started gaining momentum within the past couple of years. So we're pretty confident that we can get there. So you guys are the force multipliers. Everyone that takes the training, feel free to, let other people know about the training. We do have live offerings as well, and I can speak more to that at the end. So the goal here is to decrease this notion of social isolation, feelings of social isolation. It has very impactful consequences on mental health. And when you think of resilience, you might think resilience is very much like a individual experience, right? Like how you get through stressful times, stressful events is really, obviously you've got to have the wherewithal and the coping skills to do that. However, social support is actually the foundation to resilience. And so I'll speak to that a little bit later. So again, that is when we talk about grit, this program, this is really what it's about. There's a couple more layers to it that I really like as well. So, as I mentioned before, it was established in 2020, really designed to address at that time the stress of the pandemic, and it's since been adapted to address life stress, right? It was so effective at addressing the stress that we were experiencing that during that time that it made sense to adapt it to general day-to-day stress, potentially traumatic experiences. And I just want to highlight that this is very much a non-clinical intervention. So this is psychological first aid, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there. And I'm pretty sure everyone on this call tonight has had a helping conversation at least once, maybe twice in their lives. And so the awesome thing about grit and why I love grit, it is about providing space for somebody to out process and talk about what's happening for them, what's going on, how they're feeling about things. And then there's this focus on strengths. And so that's what really makes grit unique is I'm going to listen to you and ask you questions, and then we're going to talk about strengths. So strengths are really important to resilience. And so if we're able to focus on strengths, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to come up with new coping strategies, right? Chances are we've been doing, we've been coping before. And sometimes when we're really stressed or we're kind of stuck, we're not really able to think about past experiences and connect back to what we're doing right now. So this is an opportunity to do this through a helping conversation. So first and foremost, we're going to draw attention to what's already working for them or what's worked in the past, right? Like why reinvent the wheel? So there's this whole realm of psychology that this sort of came from, the research around it. And it's called positive psychology. And positive psychology, sort of by virtue of that statement, sounds like we're going to just focus on the positive, not the negative. And that's not what positive psychology is. Positive psychology is focusing on strengths because strengths come naturally to us. We don't have to work hard to do the things that we're good at already, right? That just makes sense. Okay, so that is the first step. And then we have this unique opportunity to add to strengths. So you might be thinking, like, well, if we're identifying strengths, why do I need to add to strengths? Well, why not, right? I mean, there's always an opportunity to explore potentially some new things, or potentially, maybe there's some other areas, resilient areas of strengths or resilient behaviors that they would potentially benefit from. And so it's not us recommending things or suggesting or, giving them the solutions. But at some point in time in the conversation, something may come up that, may be of benefit to address. And so we'll get there. That's actually step 4. At any point in the conversation, we can share resources, and that's really important to a helping conversation as well. And resources can look like so many different things. They can look like resources that are unique to the individual, right? Resources within their family, within their social circle, Resources can be external, resources can be internal. So there's a lot to think about in terms of resources. And that's not for us to know all the resources, but just knowing that that is something that we have the ability to do at any point in time in the conversation, to share or recommend resources. And also, when I think I'll get there with this as well. Maybe the helping conversation is outside of the scope of what we're comfortable with, right? I mean, that's a reality of having one of these conversations. Somebody's sharing something and it becomes really heavy, or maybe it's something that's not necessarily good for us, right? Could be upsetting for us. And so knowing that it's okay for us to take a step back, like I can still support you, and I feel like you could benefit from some additional help is always something that we have access to as well. Okay. And the resources can also be technology based. And the goal here is to encourage active coping. So unlike maybe some traditional helping conversations that you've had in the past, I'm speaking from my own experience, of course. This part was maybe not there, right? So just a lot of listening, which is great, being empathetic, validating, all of those things, which feels wonderful. We love that, feels wonderful. And it also helps that that process is necessary for us to come to our own conclusions about what we need, right? As opposed to, this person that's supporting me, problem solving for me, right? That's rarely helpful to anyone. So the goal is to encourage individual empowerment. Okay. So who to help? We won't spend a lot of time on this because it's just highlighting that, of course, there's obvious signs of distress that we notice in folks. And for whatever reason, we may intervene, we may not, and that's fine. And so it is about building awareness around some of those like really obvious, noticeable behaviors, right? So like isolating, somebody that's intentionally isolating, and not in a self-care sort of way. Like I tell people that some Fridays I get to the end of the day, and not a lot of Fridays, but like once in a great while, if I've been doing a lot of presenting, which I absolutely love, it just takes a lot of energy if I've been doing a lot. And so I get to Friday, like this has only happened like maybe a couple times in the last few months. And I get to Friday and I'm like, I can't people anymore, right? I just can't. I might start peopling again on Saturday, but I can't do it anymore, right? And, maybe I went till Sunday. That's different than now I can't people on Monday. And it's terrifying to me. And I'm going to isolate so that I don't have to do that. That's what isolation is, right? Of course, if we're noticing any really, intense displays of emotion, crying, obviously being angry, unusually irritable, those things make sense. Like, yeah, somebody's going through something. Exhaustion is another one that we see. If somebody's, it's not they didn't sleep well one night. This is like chronic exhaustion. And then there's other factors as well that can help inform us, right? If anybody's working in a high stress job, if anybody's already navigating a mental health challenge. And this one's really unique as well. Somebody's going through a difficult life transition. And I use the example of divorce because for a long time in my past professional life, I've had a couple. My past professional life, I was a life coach and personal trainer for 17 years. And so I had a lot of clients that went through divorce. Obviously, it's a common experience for a lot of folks. And my experience with divorce, personal experience divorce, was not a bad thing. I mean, maybe in the immediate moment of it, it was, stressful. But I had some time and that was behind me. And so in my mind, divorce was not a traumatic experience. And so I was not really, I didn't have this awareness that it can be hard to not be comparative, right? To be thinking about, well, my experience with divorce was not that way. So you'll be fine, right? You'll be okay. And so sometimes we tend to do that inadvertently because we're just kind of operating off of what we know, right? So sometimes the life transitions can be, this is very unique to the individual. And sometimes they may not seem really stressful to us, but they can be really profound, really impactful. So there's no clear list of individuals to support. Grit helping conversations, I used to say they can happen in 2 ways, but they can happen in 3 ways. Obviously, somebody, we're already connecting with someone, right? Whether this is like coworker, family member, loved one, friend, whatever that looks like. And we see them, we're not necessarily intentionally asking them about anything. The conversation just turns into a helping conversation, right? Because that's the nature of the relationship. They feel there's trust there and they can share things with us. Great helping conversation can also look like, now I'm noticing X, Y, and Z, and I'm actually going to reach out to this person now because I'm noticing things. And maybe I wouldn't have before, maybe not, but now I'm seeing things, so I'm going to reach out. And a helping conversation can also come now. This actually came up in just a recent training. Somebody goes, well, it can actually also be somebody approaches you and seeks you out for support. And I was like, yeah, absolutely, like intentionally. And so, yeah, it can happen in any of those ways. And of course, this is just a framework on how to have this type of helping conversation. So you're going to see the steps, and it doesn't mean you have to do these in order and it has to look a certain way. This is just a way to guide these conversations to be a little more effective. So in the training online, there's quite a bit of material information on stress. Absolutely my favorite thing to talk about, favorite thing to present on, not my favorite thing to experience. And it's all about building awareness around stress. So I love to tell people that I've been practicing mindful awareness for 32 years, right? So by virtue of that statement, you're probably like, well, good, that's great. Good for you. Like you can manage your stress. I'm so happy for you. That's not what that means. Building self-awareness is entirely different than actually practicing coping skills to navigate stressful situations, right? So I'm really good at recognizing stress. That doesn't necessarily mean I make the right decision when I recognize it, right? So that is something to remember. And when we talk about building awareness around stress, think of your own experience with stress. Do you recognize when it's happening? Are there some signs, maybe sometimes within your physical body that you notice that indicate like, hey, I'm stressed, even though your mind may say something else, right? And then what decision do you make at that point, right? Is it like, I'm going to take charge with intention and do some coping skills, or I'm going to problem solve, I'm going to address the stressor, or sometimes we just let it, we kind of spiral out of control, and that happens, right? That's part of being a human being. So again, as I mentioned, my favorite thing to talk about, won't spend much time on that. I just want to address the stress response. And so when I say the stress response, this is really about that classic fight, flight, or freeze, right? So if you're like, what is that? Please feel free to, go on the training and learn more about that. This is our automatic, I'm just going to put this out there just really briefly. It's our automatic response that happens in our nervous system. So you have no decision or say when it happens. But when we're confronted with a stressor, so for example, in the picture, there's a bear, right? So if you see the bear, generally speaking, depending on what part of the country you come from, I say that because I do some work with a suicide prevention group in Connecticut, you guys, and they see a lot of black bears out. Like, who knew? Connecticut, there's tons of black bears. The black bears come into town and no one's afraid. In fact, they're doing everything that you're not supposed to do with the bears. So they're feeding the bears, they're doing all. They're like, no, bears actually, that doesn't make us stressed. For the rest of us, though, if we encountered a bear, right, suddenly, we would have this automatic fight, flight, or freeze response. It has in there also fawning, and fawning is another response as well. There's actually several in addition to fight, flight, or freeze. And fawning is more of a trauma response. So fawning would be like, I see the bear. Oh, somebody, I've just finally, sorry, I'm trying to monitor the chat as well. So I apologize if I like missed something while I was kind of going on about some of these things. But I'm like up to date now, and I'm seeing we have a lot of bears. Oh, in Southwest Florida. Is that correct? Southwest Florida? Or I'm thinking that's Florida. Okay. There's bears all over the place. Yeah. And bears are, yeah. So won't spend too much time. And no, this isn't like cocaine bear. Okay. Perfect. Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay. So fawning would be I see the bear and I want to take the focus off of me. I'm going to throw the bear a granola bar. So I'm going to try to appease the aggressor. And that's why, and we see this in as a kind of an automatic behavior in a trauma response. Take the focus off of me, right? In any case, these are automatic responses. Think about our modern day lives, right? We're still encountering, I like to call these metaphorical bears. So don't necessarily look like bears, but they still cause our nervous system to react instantaneously, right? So throw some examples of your metaphorical bears or bears that you would think exist out there. And I'll share some of mine, right? So, for example, a huge metaphorical bear for me, not all the time, but sometimes my 14-year-old son, right, induces the stress response. He's not a bear. He's actually, I say my 14-year-old is cuddly now. We had a hard time at 12. 12 was our hard time. And so I say he's cuddly now. And by cuddly, I mean he's willing to stand next to me. So we're making strides, you guys. We're coming a long way. Okay. Toddlers. Yes, those little bears. They're like the baby bears, but oh, they can really, yes, absolutely. My 9-year-old son. So all the children are here for sure. So some other things that could be metaphorical bears. So this can look like work deadlines. This can look like an unexpected bill that came in the mail, right? It induces that stress response, but it doesn't necessarily, we're not necessarily doing fight, flight, or freeze, right? Work is a big one. Yeah, the mental load of motherhood. Oh, yeah. All the things, right? Yes, the husband, the 14-year-old. Oh, you got the double whammy. Financial challenges. Absolutely. My mom, I know. I love moms. I miss mine so much. My mom gave me a lot of stress. I love her. I miss her. It's going on 3 years. And of course, if I could have her back, yeah, but still, yes, health concerns. Thank you for that. That one's really big. Navigating that illnesses, yeah, feeling helpless. And sometimes those stressors weren't maybe chronic at one point and then they became chronic, right? Yeah, yeah, you guys, some really great examples. Thank you for that. So I want you to think about this. This is really important because it still may look like fight, flight, or freeze. And I actually have a slide coming up on this. So just kind of pause on this. It could look like fight, flight, or freeze still, right? Like you may actually encounter your metaphorical bear and freeze, right? You could just be like, I'm stuck. I can't move. That's possible. But chances are, as you age, you tend to see more bears. I mean, I I don't want any more bears. I'm trying to like reframe the bears and be like, oh, is that a bear? Maybe not, but you're right. It just depends on your perception, right? Of stress and the stressors. Okay. So it could look like those things, but it could also look like other things. And we'll have a slide on that in just a second. I just want to highlight that community stressors, this is just in addition to our day-to-day stress, we can experience even more profound stress. And sometimes we call this traumatic stress as well, right? Because, or it's secondary traumatic stress. It's more profound and impactful stress than our day-to-day stress, right? So day-to-day stress, generally speaking, remedies itself in some way, shape, or form, right? Like it either goes away. I use traffic as an example, right? Traffic is really stressful, at least for me. Like it's just, I've been in car accidents and that just adds a layer to it, but it's just like traffic now is really intense. And I recognize it's not the worst place in the country. I lived in Los Angeles for a very short period of time, and I was like, I can't do this because of the traffic, right? And other reasons. But so I understand it's not the same traffic, but it's still stressful. In any case, I get to where I'm going and the stress subsides until I have to get on the road again, right? So day-to-day stress, generally speaking, we can address it, whether, we're using coping skills, whether we problem solve, whether it just goes away on its own. It's still impactful, especially if it becomes, if it builds up or it becomes chronic. So community stressors like the ones mentioned here. So any sort of um, feelings of, fear of your health and safety being compromised is huge, right? That's a whole nother layer of stress, profound stress that really taxes our abilities to cope and navigate those situations. So these are just things to consider, especially if whoever you're supporting is going through, again, a loss in the family, a loss of employment, some sort of life transition. If children are involved, that really makes it more impactful, right? So those aren't like day-to-day stressors, and this can really increase that feeling of overwhelm and anxiety, especially if we're not really navigating our day-to-day stress effectively, right? Okay, so here's the slide that I wanted to get to. What are the observable behaviors that we notice that may indicate somebody is having a stress response, right? So back to metaphorical bears. What do you notice? So it may be fight, flight, or freeze, but what else can it be? Observable behaviors are like the things we notice. And sometimes we see these things and we're like, it's fine. They're just, they need their space, and they might need their space, right? Fidgeting hands. Thank you for that. That's a big one. Yeah. Just being really sort of, moving, shaking leg. Yeah. Those are really like hallmark signs. Somebody is like dealing with something, right? Loss of appetite. Great one. Yeah. Can look like loss of appetite. It can look like increased appetite as well. Yeah. Yeah. Facial morphing. Ooh, that's a good, I like that. The clenching of the jaw, snappy, really good stuff, you guys. Yeah. And you might think of this from your own awareness for yourself, right? Like, what do you notice that you're doing when you're feeling really stressed, right? And maybe it's taken you a while to get to that point to notice, like, make that connection. Oh, this is because I'm stressed, right? Sometimes we don't notice it, or other people have to tell us, and then we're like, oh, I guess I do that, right? Yeah, you guys have some really great ones in here. I love this. Yeah, so deep, yeah, that the deep breathing, or like the sometimes even, yeah, the sighing a lot, or even like the shallowness of where you can tell somebody's just like kind of trying to catch their breath, you know? Yeah, that's classic. Absolutely. This is great, you guys. Irritability, jumpy, checked out, crying, all the things. I love it. And so for whatever reason, we see these things, and it after today, I'm not asking you now to start checking in with everyone that's doing this. That's not what that means. It's just think about how we sort of see some of these behaviors and we think, they need space. They're fine. And sometimes we don't necessarily check in, and that's okay. It's not, there's a lot of reasons why we don't check in. That's not just the only reason. So I want to share mine because it actually took me a long time to get to this point to recognize that it was my stress response. In another presentation, I might say it's my superpower. So procrastination is my like classic stress response. And it took me a long time to figure that out, right? Probably really obvious to other people, but to me, I was like, oh, some of my best work has also been done in the 11th hour. So I wouldn't say it's the worst thing. However, I notice it's my go-to. As soon as I'm feeling overwhelmed or stressed, I start procrastinating, right? So again, those observable behaviors that we don't necessarily think, like, that's what that means, right? You guys had a great list. I love that. Um, yeah, there's some other good ones in here. Oh, hiding in housework. I love that. It's like staying super busy is another big one. Sweating. Yeah. Anxiety. Love it. Emotion, just being really emotional, getting really quiet. So now this is why knowing somebody is helpful, right? because you can recognize their baseline behaviors. And so you know when it's sort of they're out of sorts. So that's the benefit there, right? Because you wouldn't really know this if it was a stranger. Sometimes you would, if it's especially the really obvious emotional displays. Thank you so much, you guys. I love the participation. Yeah, changes in gait as well. Physiologically, it comes out. Um, Maybe somebody's like sick all the time and they just had a cold and now they have another one, or they're struggling with GI issues, right? There's a lot of ways that stress presents itself. And I love to talk about in another presentation, I love to talk about the physical manifestations of stress and how those are the ones we'll pay attention to before we actually recognize that something is happening, right? Because our brains are not actually good at informing us. They're actually lousy. In fact, we tell ourselves stories in times of stress of why, like, it's not that bad, or we rationalize things. So brain's not real honest with us about what's happening. And then it comes out in a physical way. And usually by the time that happens, it's getting pretty serious, right? Unless you're really in tune with your body. I've heard this come up with folks that have like autoimmune disorders, and they say, nope, I am so good at recognizing stress because I know what's going to happen to my body if I don't. And so I can start to feel little things happening in my body. And so that's a great way to, again, build awareness is pay attention to your body, those aches and pains that you can't necessarily pinpoint, right? Okay. Intersections of stress. I kind of talked about this already with the community stressors, so I won't go into this. Again, it's just thinking about how stress can be completely different, right? It can be more profound than day-to-day stress. So maybe up to this point, you were like, stress is stress, but think about those more profound traumatic experiences that we also experience by supporting other people in a secondary way. And we navigate those experiences differently. And those, again, if we're not coping really effectively with day-to-day stress, traumatic stress can be pretty profound. Even chronic stress is different than day-to-day stress. That can be really challenging to navigate, right? So the good news about that is sometimes if somebody's really struggling with basic stress, it really comes down to how can we address stress at the most basic level. And that comes down to honoring basic needs. And we'll talk about that when we get a little bit further along. Okay, so self-efficacy. This is another one of my favorite topics. I love it because for a long time, so I'm not a psychologist first. I would almost consider myself a biologist before a psychologist. And so when I first learned about self-efficacy a long, long time ago, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. I wasn't really thinking how this applies. It was a theory. And so, yeah, I was like, okay, this is how people learn. Yeah, makes sense to me. And I have an example to share that will help kind of bring this into perspective. Self-efficacy is, for the longest time when I was teaching resilience, even before I was at UCCS, I was a contractor at Fort Carson, and I taught a resilience curriculum and human performance psychology. And so I would talk about resilience as like this process. It's a process. I would always say that it's a process. How we navigate stress, it's a process. And like people would be nodding, like, yeah, it is. But it was like somebody finally said, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? It's a process. And I was like, I don't know how to explain that. And so this was a while ago, you guys. And now I'm like, this is how you explain it. So the process is this wonderful notion of self-efficacy. And another way to think of self-efficacy is self-confidence. So it's that belief in your abilities to navigate a challenging experience, to navigate stress, to become more resilient. And there's different ways that we do that we come to learn and take in information and assimilate those experiences into our life. And so this is how we do it. So first and foremost, the best way to learn anything is through experience. Like, think about your own experiences in life, and especially around stress, resilience, going through hard things, like you have to do the things, right? And that's how we learn. And the beauty of learning and having experience is that we can connect back to past experiences to address whatever we're navigating now. And that's really important because they don't even have to look the same. That's what's amazing about it. I can connect back to an experience that I had 10 years ago and think, you know what? It doesn't look anything like what I'm going through now, but I know that I got through that. I did the hard thing, right? And I got through it. And that built my confidence in my abilities to get through this situation. I'll figure it out, right? Like I don't have the answers, but I know I can get through it. That's the powerful thing with experience. However, there's times in our lives where we're just having trouble connecting back, right? Like I've been there many times where I'm just like, I don't know why I'm struggling with this right now. And I don't know why I can't connect back. Like it's just not happening. And that's where helping conversation can be so powerful. When I'm talking about helping conversation, this is not exclusive to just adults. This can be with our children, our teenagers, right? I'll speak to that a little bit more at the very end. We have an additional grit track now dedicated to teens. So again, this is about allowing somebody to out process. And that's really important, especially when they're maybe having trouble connecting back to past experiences, identifying their strengths, right? Okay, so experience is the best. However, maybe we can't connect, maybe we don't have it. We can learn from others vicariously. And what that means is we can observe, we can ask questions, we can learn, we can watch others, all the things. As a parent, this might be relatable and also extremely frustrating because I would love to impart all my wisdom on my son. It would be great. I've told him, gosh, you could really benefit from some of this. And he's like, yeah, okay, I get it. The reality is he has to go through it, right? And so vicarious learning is a wonderful tool, but the person has to be intentional about wanting to use it to learn, right? We can't just impart wisdom on folks. That doesn't work. I wish it did. Um, I was a teenager once and young adult. My mom had all the things to tell me, and did I listen? No. However, it was valuable if somebody was wanting to use it. Okay, so that's an additional way. Persuasion is another wonderful way that we can learn. And persuasion is two parts. It says right here, social persuasion. So social persuasion looks like the folks that you're surrounded with, like your family, friends, coworkers, colleagues. What are the types of things they're saying to you? Are they positive, or is it a lot of criticism? Do they give you praise? Do they give you affirmations? Are they empathetic? Do they validate, right? So this really has an impact on our belief in our abilities, right? I mean, obviously, if we're getting a lot of really effective, positive praise, we're going to feel better about ourselves as opposed to getting a lot of critique, right? And negativity. Okay, so that's powerful, but arguably not as powerful as what we say to ourselves, right? So think about your own inner dialogue and what does it sound like? So I like to call this the voice in your head, the non-clinical voice in your head. I work with a lot of clinicians. So when I first said I was doing something and it was on self-talk and I said, the voice in your head. And they were like, no, probably not something you want to be saying. And I was like, okay, the non-clinical voice in your head. I've had people tell me, I've never heard a voice in my head. I'm like, that's fine. It could be a thought, it could be images, whatever. You communicate with yourself more than anyone else. So what does that sound like? If you're like, it doesn't sound that good, you would be in the majority because the reality is, and it's very unfortunate, our brains are not self-compassionate by nature. And that's really sad. That makes me sad because the brain's really just designed to protect you, prepare you for action. So the brain's going to always be looking for things that could potentially go wrong. And then this can lead to feeling sometimes very negative. So our brains are not designed to build us up and naturally. We have to work to do that. So the good news is we can build self-compassion, and that can really help us in so many different ways, to include navigating stressful times, right? Going through hard times, challenges, having that self-compassionate inner voice. That, in my mind, is arguably the most powerful out of all of these, right? I mean, the experience needs to be there, but really, if we're not speaking to ourselves in a way that's compassionate, empathetic, kind, right? And we're focused on failure and all the things that didn't go right, that can really impact our belief in our abilities. Okay. And then lastly, the ability to self-regulate. And I feel like probably a lot of the parents on here can totally relate to this. I feel like when I was growing up, there was no word for self-regulation. It was like, I don't know, you just somehow, I don't think I even learned how to self-regulate until I was an adult, like maybe even in my 30s, right? I mean, I'm being honest about that. There was not even really language for that. It was just sort of like, I don't know, you manage your stress, right? And I feel like now we spend a lot of time, and this is great, with young children on self-regulation, right? Like using your words and let's talk about our feelings and being able to do those things, right? And to be able to regulate when we're feeling really uncomfortable. And I think it's wonderful. It's great. I mean, we should all be learning this as young children. It would be an amazing, save us so much agony down the road. So what that means is it's not that, oh, you have to have a handle on your emotions and you need to be doing, you know, no stress. That's not what that means. It just means being able to be effective in situations that are stressful, right? Not letting the stress get the best of you and sometimes we don't. And it's okay because it's part of being a human, right? Sometimes we do our best and it's still not enough, or, it didn't go as we would like it to. That's okay. But just being able to take some initiative to do that is a huge part in believing in ourselves. It really is. So think about your own experience with stress and how that self-regulation piece is arguably, I mean, if that wasn't there, it doesn't matter how much experience and everything else you have, right? Okay, so for example, here's a practical example to kind of put it into perspective. So has anyone on this call ever endeavored to do such a thing, to run a marathon? So as a personal trainer for 17 years, never did this, right? I have posed this question to groups and I usually get, a couple folk, one or two folks, sometimes none. Um, and I say, okay, that's great. Like maybe it was a half marathon. Sometimes it's a full marathon, which I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. And so I asked the question, okay, so great. Also, so we do have some marathoners on here. Okay. Yeah. 2 marathons, Jody. Wow. That's pretty impressive. Wow. Uh, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. Karuchi has done the 20-mile walkathon. Okay. So that's a lot. That is yeah, I've not done a 20-mile walkathon either. And that's a lot like it'd be a marathon for sure. Yeah. Oh, wow. So yeah, the Manitou Incline can definitely feel like a marathon. Yeah. Wow. And after getting pneumonia even. Ooh. Okay. So for the marathon folks, I'm guessing I'm going to make some assumptions that you probably, or anybody that's done any sort of like physical challenge, right? Some sort of event. The marathon is kind of the one that comes to mind, but it could be something else, right? Um, Chances are you probably didn't just sign up and then show up, right? You didn't just sign up and say, okay, I'll be there and show up. And I've asked this question before, and I believe it or not, I get often somebody that's like, no, I actually did just sign up and show up. And I'm like, what? I know. No one signed up and showed. And they're like, no, I didn't. I go, did you complete the marathon? They're like, yeah, it was hard, but I did it. And I was like, You don't count. No way, that's not normal. Nobody's doing that, right? Okay, yeah. So for the folks that did are backing this up. No, there was a program. There was a dedicated training effort that was required to get ready for this. It wasn't, like, oh, I just did it, right? So yeah, lots of mental agility as well, of course, and that doesn't just happen, right? There's a process. I'm coming back to the process. So of course, this experience of training for the marathon is couldn't have it without. I mean, you can't just show up to the marathon. I mean, you could, but you're not going to complete the marathon, or it would be really miserable, right? So yeah, experience first and foremost. Vicarious learning. Out of curiosity, for those that did do the marathon or any of the walkathon, did you have some other folks involved where maybe they had done marathons before and they had some insight, right? And maybe even if they didn't have it, there was still like some support coming from them. Yeah, so a group of friends, absolutely. And I've almost always heard somebody say, no, I went with somebody that did do a marathon before. So, obviously they had a lot of insight, right? So vicarious learning. Of course, the social persuasion, if you're running with friends, right? Or even like before the marathon, you're training and maybe you're not having a great day or they're not having a great day. They don't want to do the training or they don't want to do the run. And you're like, no, come on, we're going to do this. Like, you've got this, right? Yeah. So thinking about social persuasion, think about your own inner dialogue during that time. Were you also cheering yourself on? That's huge. Or were you just like, no, you're not gonna be able to do this? Chances are no, you were probably like, no, this is hard, but I can do this. I'm going to do this. Okay. So I want you to think for a second. This is for everyone. You trained 6 months. That's what I've heard at minimum is usually the amount of time that's required to train for a marathon. And I've also heard you don't actually run the full marathon in training. You only run like half of it or a little more than half. And I think that's fascinating because I'm like, and they're like, yeah, somehow that day, you do the full marathon and you didn't think you could, right? And I'm like, wow, so you don't actually in training run the full marathon. Most people are like, no, no, that's a lot of running. It'll happen on the day though. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. So again, thinking about all the factors that come into play that help get you through that, especially if you've never run a full marathon. Okay. So for everyone thinking about this marathon example, so you've trained 6 to 9 months, right? You've got your group that you guys have been training together, right? There's been a lot of investment in this, whether it's in your running shoes, but the time that you've spent, all the things, right? Training plans. Then the day comes, the marathon finally gets here, and you're on your way to the marathon driving in your car, and you get in a fender bender. Tiny accident before you get to the race. And it's a huge bummer, right? So you're just like, oh my God, I love my car. And now I've got to deal with this. So nobody's injured. It's not that kind of situation, right? Thankfully. Are you still going to the marathon? Or are you going to turn around and go home? What do you guys think? Are you going home or are you going to go show up at the race? See, the car is drivable. You exchanged information, all the things. I've had some people say, no, I'm going home. I didn't want to run it anyways. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense, right? Yeah. Yeah, of course. We're all going. Yes. Yeah. I was like, nope, I'm staying. I'm going home. I'll do this another time. There'll always be another marathon, right? I paid, so I'm gonna run. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, going. Yeah, everyone's going. I love it. Okay. So you're there and you're totally like upset. You show up and everybody's like, what happened? Car accident was awful. I'm so mad. I got to fix my car now, blah, blah, blah. And you're still going to run the race and you've got to regulate. You've got to self-regulate, right? Maybe I've heard somebody say, no, I'm going to use that anger and I'm going to run because I've got this energy now. I'm like, that's great. Yeah, absolutely. Right. And yeah, maybe that's not going to be your perfect run. Maybe the whole time you're going to be thinking about the car accident, right? Or maybe you're not, and you're just going to be grateful that it wasn't worse, or you're going to see a different perspective. Doesn't matter. Either way, we're doing it, right? And so thank you for that. I appreciate that feedback. I think it's a great example too. It shows that process of self-efficacy from start to finish, right? even with but that self-regulation piece is so important, right? Because with the best laid plans, something can still happen, right? We can do all the things, be prepared, and then the day comes, and then, something happens. It always happens like that, right? Something out of the blue, and now we're completely sidelined and derailed, right? So that's what self-efficacy is about, and why it's so important to a helping conversation is because we're recognizing strengths, we're connecting back to experiences, we're using vicarious learning, we're talking about self-regulation, all the things, right? And this will make more sense as we get into the steps. Collective efficacy is really the same, except in a group, right? So thinking about your organization, thinking about even your family as a group, right? It's the belief in our abilities to navigate a stressful situation, navigate a challenging time together. And the wonderful thing about collective efficacy is that we can leverage individual efficacy for others, right? So if somebody in our group is struggling, right, I can give some extra support to this person because I have it to give. And so it's really a powerful concept, right? Because we can support each other if we're willing to come together. And when somebody has it to give, they can. If they don't, that's fine too. But we can help build other self-efficacy with our own. Okay. So again, as I mentioned, how this ties into grit, it's all about focusing on strengths. Allowing this person to talk. We're going to get, that's step 2, allowing this person to talk. We're going to ask them some questions, basic questions, so that they can start to come to these insights on their own, in their own way. And the only way to do that is actually through talking. I didn't actually realize that until I lost my talking person, my out processing person, my mom. I have folks now, but initially she was my person, right? And so I always had her to talk and out process and, get insight and, be able to, um, I don't want to say I got a totally like, uh, you know, objective point of view by talking to her, but it allowed me to get things out, right? We have to do that. That's fundamental human need. And so I didn't realize how impactful that was until it was gone. And then I was like, ooh, I don't have that. And when everything is stuck here and you don't have that ability, or not necessarily ability, but you don't have that resource to get it out, it can be really tough to process everything in your own head, right? And to figure all these things out. So that's why that step is so important. Okay, some great stuff here in the chat, you guys. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the feedback and participation. Virtual trainings I enjoy them, and I also recognize sometimes they're tough. You're like, I like this, and I'm, trying to stay engaged. So I appreciate this so much. Okay, so this is not part of grit. It's just a helpful tool to get you thinking about folks you could potentially reach out to. If you take away nothing else from tonight, I hope that you're going to think about this piece, right? You don't have to follow the steps of grit. You don't have to do any of that. But maybe it's getting you thinking now, like, I haven't talked to this person in a while. I think I'm going to reach out and check in, right? Maybe there's going to be some questions that you're going to ask differently now. Or maybe you're going to allow for more space for them to talk, right? As opposed to maybe trying to problem solve. I was horrible at this, you guys, for a long, long time. Like, I hear what you're saying, and let's get to work. Let's get to work on this problem. I'm very solution focused. So step 2 is challenging, and it still is challenging for me because I'm like, oh, when can I chime in and tell you what I think? That's not what it's about. That's not what a helping conversation is about, unless somebody is specifically coming to you saying, what do you think about this? I value your insight and opinion. Right? But generally speaking, no, that's not. Most folks are like, no, I don't really want that. I just want to talk. And so that can be tricky as a supporter. Okay. Social support map. So if you're interested in this is actually a tool for relationships through Columbia University. And it's designed to actually identify the types of support, the folks that are supporting you. And it's an interactive tool that you can use that will actually um, give you insight into the type of relationship it is, like in terms of support. Like, is this empathetic support? What is this relationship like? Is this, is this a steady, solid relationship, or is it very tenuous? And so this is really, it's a neat tool, but it's not, I'm not using it in the way that it's used. So what I want you to think about, I still put the website on there because I think if you're interested in that, it's really, it's kind of a neat way to explore social support for yourself. I just want you to think of maybe one or two folks that you could potentially reach out to that might benefit from a helping conversation. Maybe you're already having conversations with this person and you're like, oh, I want to try something new. I'm gonna maybe try some of these questions, right? Maybe spending more time in step two. Maybe talking about strengths is brand new for you. It was for me. And I love it. It's such a great way to transition from step two, from the, venting, the out processing portion to, let's move towards, again, individual empowerment, active coping. So thinking a little bit about what might make the conversation different and what types of questions might you ask. Okay, so diving into the steps. Okay, so step one, making contact. Step two, so I've been talking about asking questions, right? And this is just getting insight. These are not the most profound, thought-provoking questions. This is just basic, keep it simple, basic questions to get insight. Um, I'll share a quote when we get to step two, and hopefully that'll kind of make a little more sense. Step two is really challenging for a lot of people as well. Step three is about identifying the strengths. We're going to talk just briefly about resilience as well. Step four is adding to strengths. So again, we have an opportunity to do that. We're going to talk about the resilient behaviors that can potentially help. And step five is reviewing, summarizing, and talking about action steps. Sounds like a lot. It's really not. And action steps are my favorite because they're not goals, but they get this person taking action, moving towards, again, that individual empowerment. And this is going to be very unique to them. The action step should be coming from them, not from us, right? We might be like, oh, it sounds like you should really start doing X, right? That's what I'm hearing. What do you think? No, this needs to come from them when we're talking about some steps they want to take moving forward. Okay. As I mentioned very early on, this is all this, the research around grit is all around psychological first aid. Psychological first aid is a non-clinical initial disaster response. So what that means, it is like basic first aid, but not in like mental health first aid, because that is something completely different. So there is actually mental health first aid training. That's not what this is. That would definitely be more advanced. This is just like, I also call this just being a good human, right? This is just checking in. What do you need right now? How can I help you? And it's not necessarily what can I do in terms of fixing your problem? Like, how can I help you in terms of providing support for you right now in a very non-clinical way? And it can absolutely be done. Sometimes we think, oh no, that feels like counseling, like that feels kind of scary because I'm asking people about feelings. That's a human thing, right? You can absolutely deep dive feelings and then it can become more than it needs to be, right? In terms of what you're willing to provide. And that goes for me as well. I'm a non-clinical practitioner. So I recognize my boundaries with some things, right? And especially if somebody has some really intense emotional distress and is really struggling, I'm probably not the best person to be talking to. There's definitely folks out there, professional folks that can provide that advanced support, and that's really important. So what's not in grit, and I'm eventually going to get there with putting it into the curriculum. We haven't quite come to a consensus on it yet. Is this whole notion of boundaries for you as the support person. Because let's face it, we've had these conversations and they've looked different. And sometimes this looks like somebody that's coming to you over and over again, maybe with the same problems. And it just feels like, like I just don't want to be the sounding board for this, right? Because I'm talking about this like, oh, these are, it's just have a helping conversation and just being a good human. And that's not they always look, right? Sometimes it's just that out processing piece can be really heavy, or it could be just like a lot of stuff that you're like, this is not this is not what I can support you with. So recognizing your own limitations is so important. First and foremost, taking care of yourself and what you need before supporting others. Always the most important. And I didn't really preface that in the beginning of the training, but that is by far the most important. Okay, so all that to say, this is non-clinical. It's not therapy. It's not counseling. None of that. It's just being, a human, connecting with another person and having the awareness to know when, I can continue to support you. And even if this person is like, no, I do need additional support, I can still support you. Like, it's not like, okay, you're going here now and I'm done. That's not what that is. I mean, we can absolutely support people in a very basic human way without having to do, those advanced mental health skills. Okay. So that is, again, that's the foundation of where the research is around grit. So step one, making contact. Simple enough, right? And I mentioned the 3 different ways that can happen. I really just want to highlight on this slide what you guys think about asking for permission. It's bullet point 3. And I'm always curious because I have not done this until just recently, right? Like as the program manager, I do ask permission when I talk to people. However, that's not my way of doing things. So I would be just really, I love to support people. And so I would just like, nope, I see you and I'm going to support you. Like, let's talk, and kind of skipping this step. So there's no right or wrong way to do this, right? So you don't have to ask for permission. Yeah, I appreciate the insight there. It depends on the situation. Sometimes people just want you to. And then depending on the relationship too, although I've heard, because I said, well, maybe you wouldn't do this with a spouse, every time. And I've had people say, no, I do it. I asked my spouse do you want to talk about this right now? Is this a good time for you? Like, and so I like it. I like it a lot. And I also recognize it's not mandatory, but when we're thinking about building trust in a relationship, this could be helpful, right? It could be a helpful strategy to ask for permission. Maybe it's not the right time and place. We might think it is, but they're like, no, maybe I'm not in the right space to talk about it. Or maybe I'm not the right person, right? So that's also something that could come up. And so we have an opportunity to be like, okay, if I'm not the right person, let me help find somebody that you can talk to as well, right? So again, it just builds that little additional like layer that we can't really see, that trust layer, right? Of course, privacy is important. Um, Thinking about how, again, time and place is a huge consideration, but thinking about the environments that we have these conversations in, can conversations be overheard, right? Just additional considerations as well. Yeah. And thanks for this, Jasmine. I think it's important to acknowledge that you appreciate that they trust you with their big things. Yeah, absolutely. And these can be in close relationships that maybe we've never talked about that and we understand that. And hey, why not try it? Right. It's the worst thing that could happen. They could be like, why are you asking me that? Of course, you can talk. Yeah, of course we can talk about it. Right. So maybe even just trying something different. Okay. So step 2, as I mentioned, is the step that I think most folks are apprehensive about, right? Because of the boundaries, potentially because sometimes we don't know what to say after somebody, we ask a question and somebody tells us something really intense, right? Or something heavy. And then what do we say, right? And so sometimes that's why we don't ask because we're like, I don't know what to do with that when I get it, or feeling pressured to say the right thing. right? Like, oh, I've got to have a response for whatever they say. And the reality is none of that is our responsibility, right? So take the pressure off yourself, feeling like, oh, I've got to come up with, a response. I've got to say something really meaningful. Nope, nope, nope. That's not what it's about. And it wouldn't even matter anyways. And this is what the quote that I was wanting to share with you. So I love the Maya Angelou quote. People won't remember the things that you said or the things that you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel, right? So think about that. It's more about, and think about your own experiences with a helping conversation, like somebody supporting you. Like maybe I don't remember the specific things that people have told me, but I just remember the feeling, right, of them, wanting to be there for me. So it isn't about the things that we're saying, right? It's just about providing the space where they can feel safe to share whatever's going on, right? And so there's ways that we can elicit this insight. So just and again, as I mentioned, I kind of mentioned this early on that it can be really tempting to want to go into problem solving mode. I don't know if there's anyone else on this call tonight that's like me, wants to fix it. Like you're telling me what's going on, and I've got a pretty good idea what could be helpful right now, right? And I also think about folks I know that have, yeah, thank you. I'm so glad I'm not the only fixer. Yes. And, I think about my own experience, like coming to people and them giving me advice. And I would be kind of like, I mean, I appreciate it, but I'm thinking to myself, like, no, I don't want that. So, right. Think about what you would want. Rarely are we wanting problem solving, right? Hate when the husband tries to fix stuff. Yeah, it's so maddening when people try to fix, right? Even though it's coming from a place of good intention. Like they're like, no, I just really want to help you. And sometimes we fix because we're uncomfortable with, that space and sharing things that could be, really painful or sensitive, challenging. And now we're like, oh my gosh, like let's move this along. So there's a lot of reasons why we fix, right? Rarely is it because we don't care. Um, so yeah, this is I've had a lot of people say spouses are notorious for doing this. So it can be really challenging. So just knowing that in order to have a more effective conversation, resist that temptation, especially if you are somebody that, by virtue of being a parent, by virtue of being in maybe a job where you are expected to have the answers to problem solve, right? It's very natural for us to want to do that. And so now we don't do that. And it's like, it feels really weird, right? Okay. So step two, again, resisting that temptation. So what types of questions are we asking? Well, we're asking very basic questions. If you have some powerful questions that you want to share in the chat, please feel free. Because I love when people share their different questions that they like to ask. Because I'm still like asking, how are you doing? And no, really, how are you doing? Right? Because what do we say when somebody asks us, how are we doing? We're like, we're fine, we're good, everything's fine, right? So, how are you doing is like the are you okay, right? Where you're going to get the very like predictable response. Unless, you don't, which some people still, you'll ask them, are you okay? And they're like, no. And then they tell you all the reasons why. That's not common. Usually people are like, no, I'm fine, right? How are you doing gets that response. So that's why I said, no, how are you doing? Right? Come back and ask it again. Lots of other questions we can ask. What's going on for you right now? What's happening? We might have some insight about things that they're dealing with. And we ask about that. How's your son? What's new? Whatever that looks like. How are you handling things emotionally? That might stop someone in their tracks, right? If you're like, yeah, well, how are you handling things emotionally? How are you coping mentally? I love that. Absolutely. Somebody said their question is, how is your heart? I said, I'm pretty sure if somebody asked me how my heart is, I would probably start crying. How's your heart? I was like, somebody cares about my heart? Yeah, right. So you can you can ask whatever question. The point of the questions. So the question that just popped up in the chat, can you change it or do you have the resources to do? Oh, so you're asking that as like a question for the person that you would be supporting? I'm not sure I entirely understand the question, so I didn't want to speak to that. Okay, yeah, absolutely. That's your go-to. Yeah, I like that. I like that. That's really unique. Yeah. And then so Holly says, how are you really doing? I want the long answer. Yeah, so these are great, you guys. Absolutely. The point is, these aren't, you know, like I said, this isn't like we're not life coaching. We're not doing asking people, what's holding you back, no, none of that. This is just getting insight. And how we do that is we ask open-ended questions. Of course, we're going to ask some close-ended questions, right? So close-ended is going to elicit a yes or no response. Are you okay? Right? Uh, you know, we're not asking any of the what's, how's. I'll get to whys in just a second. So we don't want to lead, right, with a close-ended question, right? Is everything okay? Right? That's probably not going to, I mean, it might get us somewhere, but it's probably not going to get us the insight that we're looking for. Why questions? So why questions are fine. Again, probably not something we want to come out the gate with. Like, why are you feeling like that? Right? Why did that happen? It feels, right? It feels like now this person has to explain themselves. But of course, we're going to ask a why question in a very, like normal conversation. It's going to come up, right? If you could put down one thing, what would it be? Is that like the question that you're asking this person, just out of curiosity? Sorry, I don't want to take it out of context. Um, yeah, I'm thinking, okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, these are your questions, Jasmine. Thank you. I love them. Yeah. Ooh, getting really like getting people to think, right? I like that. So again, anything that's gonna get somebody to start talking, right? This doesn't have to be, we don't have to think of anything crazy. Okay. So in the curriculum online, there's quite a bit of information on communication skills as well as, nonverbals. So nonverbals are communication skills as well. So this is just recognizing other signs that somebody may not be receptive, right? So, and a lot of times this is intuitive, like sometimes, I don't, not for everyone. We just sort of recognize these things. It doesn't have to necessarily be said to us verbally. We're just picking it up in other ways, right? So this can look like eye contact changes. Eye contact is interesting to me. I talk a lot about this because depending on the day, I'm not super great with eye contact, and it's fine. Like it's just how it's my comfort level, right? And then there's other times where I'm really great with eye contact, or I'm sort of flexing to how that person is with their eye contact, right? I want to adapt to that. So if they're not really feeling comfortable with like maintaining, solid eye contact for any length of time, I'm not going to do that if I can sense they're uncomfortable with it. So eye contact is iffy. It just depends, right? Sometimes even if somebody's talking about something stressful, maybe they're like their gaze is shifted down and they're just not making eye contact. That's okay, right? But we notice it in other ways. It usually comes out in the way they're sitting, body language, right? Or maybe some verbal expressions or just the way the tone in their voice is just saying, hey, it's not a good time. Or, yeah, this isn't really what I'm wanting to do, right? Okay. If that's the case, we can check in. Is this an okay time to talk? Are you in a good place to talk about this? Again, I might not be the person. Let's find you somebody else if that's the case, but just know that I'm here to talk, right? In any case, we have the opportunity to check in. So not feeling like we have to pressure this person into telling us what's going on. Okay. Step 3, my favorite step, because it's all about strengths. So I'm going to throw up these definitions on resilience because they're the classic go-tos. If you have some thoughts about resilience and you want to put it in the chat, what resilience means to you, feel free to do that. I love that. I will share my most favorite example that I did not come up with. It was somebody in another training that gave me this gem many years ago. And I share it now all the time because I'm like, I love that. Yeah, persistence and perseverance. Love it, right? I'm not in love with the things on the screen. I just feel like they're fine. And if you're like, no, that's what I think, then that's okay. It's, it's just sort of like my preference around it. I do like the learning and growing part. That to me makes sense. Um, so the example that was shared with me, it was a woman and she said, resilience to me is like a big rubber band. And I was like, okay, I see where this is going. You're going to stretch the rubber band out, let it go. It's going to, so I thought it was going to be the classic, like regain elasticity, right? She said, you stretch the rubber band way out, like so far out, can't be stretched anymore. You release the rubber band, it falls to the floor and it stays in its same shape or its big stretched out shape. So never goes back to it's a normal shape. And it's okay with that. And I love that so much because there's this acceptance piece that I think is so important. We never talk about that, right? We're just sort of like, there's sort of an expectation, I think, that we put on ourselves when we go through something really difficult that we need to come out looking like, oh, I need to get back to where I was, right? Like I'm going through something right now, but I'm going to get back. I'm going to get back there. And I think we're doing ourselves a huge disservice when we do that, right? Like setting expectations really high needs to look like this on the other side. Because the reality is it won't look like that, right? Things are going to be different and we've changed in that process. And maybe we don't necessarily feel like it was for the better right then and there, right? Like maybe you're like, it looks different or it's not what I wanted. And I don't feel like you know, whatever, like it's not, you're feeling like maybe you're not looking like you did before. And that's okay. So that acceptance piece is so important. And I think that's something arguably that, we don't talk about this in grit per se, is in terms of like the helping conversation, but thinking about if somebody's really struggling with that, having to look like things, were before the event or before this challenging time, giving themselves a little bit of grace or encouraging them to do that, right? Because we're not going to be the same on the other side. Okay. Some really great comments in here as well, you guys. Yeah, I love that. And thank you so much for sharing and being open with us. I really appreciate the vulnerability. Yeah. Thank you for that, Janine. Absolutely. You won't be the same. And acceptance is not the easiest thing. Trust me. I'm saying it like just, practice acceptance around that. And no, acceptance is back to this process when we talk about something else that I didn't mention in self-efficacy was the the element of time, right? Time is absolutely important to that process. And we don't talk about that as well, right? It's sort of like it's like a given, but it's worth mentioning as well. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate that. Okay. So asking about strengths in times of stress, like intense stress, when think about your own experience, because I really believe that we have to have an intimate understanding of stress for ourselves before we can be really effective at supporting others. And the reason for that, it's not in a comparative way. It's not like I need to understand stress for myself because that's how I'm going to see it in others. No, we use it as an empathy tool, right? So it doesn't matter what the circumstances, what they're navigating, if it, looks like the stress I've experienced or not. It doesn't matter, right? But I can connect to those emotions, right? Those feelings during times of stress, right? Different situations, but we all experience those very, very similar emotions. So we use it as an empathy tool. So when we're in the thick of it and you're really like stuck, you might notice that you tend to focus on all the negative things, right? Like everything is, life is just really hard right now and it's just all bad. Everything I see is negative, right? And there's a reason for that. Your brain is actually doing that, believe it or not, as a protective mechanism. It's horrible, right? It's like, really, thanks, brain, for being there for me, right? So the brain's trying to help you, believe it or not, by staying on alert for whatever else is coming down the pipeline, right? However, in the background, there are things happening that are actually positive. We're just not placing our awareness on those things, right? Because we're stuck. That's called the negativity bias. And we all have it. It's not some people have more, negativity bias than others. We all have it. And in times of stress, that's when it really turns on. So that's why having this helping conversation can be a great opportunity to ask questions to help get them out of the negativity bias. And that'll make sense when I throw some of the questions up here. So again, sometimes that we just need that conversation. We need that ability to talk, to be able to connect back to those experiences, to be able to identify strengths. Okay, so questions that we have, all kinds of great questions. What are you doing right now that's helping you cope? That's one of my favorite questions because I've asked people this before and they're like, nothing, I'm not doing anything. That's why I'm having such a hard time. And I'm like, okay, so what are you doing for basic needs right now? So what are you doing for food? What are you doing? How are you taking care of your body? Are you showering, right? Are you getting some movement? Not necessarily exercise, but are you moving your body? Are you getting some sleep, right? So we kind of, I say basic needs is my go-to for all things because think about your own experience with this. So basic needs, I'm talking about, again, food, hydration, sleep, hygiene. I love hygiene because what's one of the first things to go for most of us, right? When we're really stressed, hygiene. However, when we're taking care of hygiene and those other things, we can still feel stressed, but guess what? We're doing pretty good because if those things weren't happening, we'd really be struggling, right? So sometimes it's a matter of just reframing that, yeah, even some of these basic activities that we don't give much thought to because we feel like we just do these things. That's actually self-care. So if somebody's like, I'm not doing anything, but they're doing those things, it's like, hey, actually you are. How would you be feeling if you weren't doing those things, right? Okay. And then movement as a basic need as well, right? Not exercising. Exercise is great, but sometimes just moving our bodies. I've had people say, no, I clean my house when I'm really stressed because that's a great way for me to move my body instead of exercising, right? Because that's what I can do in this moment. I'm like, oh, that's great. It's like a 2-for-1. You're moving and cleaning your house. I can't get there yet, but like in my mind, I'm like, oh, I'll just go for a walk around the neighborhood. I'm not cleaning the house. Okay. Other great questions. What parts of your life feel good to you right now? I love this. And I recognize this question may not be the best for every situation, right? If somebody's really emotionally overwhelmed, probably not, what feels good to you right now? What part of your life feels good? Probably not the best question. However, if somebody's in a good, decent place where they can, I've 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 had this question met with like some confusion, like why would you ask me that? Right? You're asking me what feels good and nothing feels good. Again, remember that negativity bias is happening, and this is a great opportunity to get somebody to think differently. Okay, it's a great question. It really is. I love it. Because yes, things are happening in the background that are actually going really well, right? In a similar way, are there times during this stress, during this challenging time that you've been able to experience positive emotions? Believe it or not, we have the ability to be in a very difficult situation and also feel joy or some sort of positive emotion. It sounds like counterintuitive, but it can happen. They can happen together. Again, are we willing to recognize? Are we willing to see that, right? This is a great opportunity to ask somebody that so that they can sort of come to those conclusions. Another great question, have you been able to offer support to anyone who's struggling? Oh my gosh. So one of my other, might have been a great presentation. Somebody had said that, yeah, it was actually because it was a specific question. Somebody said their go-to for navigating stress, like really, intense stress was volunteering. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. You are an amazing person to be stressed and then volunteering because that's how you relieve stress. And she goes, no, it actually uh, is a little bit selfish. And I'm thinking, I don't see the connection. And she said, I go because it helps bring me perspective. And I thought that was really awesome because it would, the specific cause that she was volunteering for. Um, she was working with a very underserved population and seeing a lot of, people in some really tough situations. And so it was a cause she was passionate about. So obviously she's benefiting from that, but she's getting a change in perspective. I thought that was pretty cool, right? And then of course I didn't highlight this as much as I wanted to, but the social connection piece. So being able to connect with others, even if like, yeah, I'm offering support to somebody else, but I'm having a hard time. I'm benefiting by supporting somebody else. There's a lot of reasons for that. Humans draw meaning from supporting others, and that's really powerful. Not We're social creatures by nature, so that helps us, even if that person isn't necessarily providing me support, right? Just getting that meaning, that purpose, that ability to connect with somebody else. Asking who their support folks are, like sometimes we're not, again, thinking about the people in our lives as support, right? Like who's been helpful in getting you through this, or who are you leaning on right now, right? Is there anybody that's providing support for you in some way, shape, or form? Maybe they're like, no, not really. And then talking about maybe some friends or other, people they're connected to, and it's like, oh no, actually, I do actually get support from from people. I'm just not thinking about it that way. And then one of my favorite ones, asking about past experiences. How did you overcome that difficult experience? What exactly did you do? How did you get through that? Again, it's not about it needs to look the same. I need to do the same things, or it doesn't match that experience. It's about believing in their abilities to do it again. Okay. There's lots of other questions online as well on the curriculum on if you sign up for that. So if you're like, yeah, I want to see more questions or deep dive this a little bit more, that is available. So step 4, adding to strengths. Maybe you've gotten to step 3 and you're like, I feel like there's enough to work with here. Why would I want to add? Well, why not? Right? Step 4 is interesting for a couple different reasons. So I believe there's always an opportunity to address any of these areas of resilient behaviors. I love to call this the Captain Obvious slide because it says encourage resilient behaviors, and it's all the things that we know, right? Social connection, positive activities, mood improving activities, healthy eating and drinking, sleeping, exercise, relaxation. Like, yeah, of course, we know that. This is going to look different for each person. So maybe at some point in the conversation, uh, you know, maybe not exercise per se, but movement came up. Like I'm used to take a, short walk at lunchtime and I'm not really doing that. And I'm just not moving my body. So we didn't necessarily talk about that in terms of strengths, but this is a behavior that we can add, right? We can add this behavior in terms of strengthening coping, right? So all these are going to look different, and it's not what it looks like at first glance, right? So social connection and support is anything that allows us to connect to others. It could be volunteering, it could be calling a friend that you haven't talked to in a while, right? So social connection is one, at minimum, one other person. And I also like to say, or a pet. If you would like to swap out your 14-year-old for a corgi, you can do that too. That's sometimes that happens, right? We substitute a pet for the child if that's your social support, which that's what it looks like these days for me, you guys. But no, really, it's just one other person, right? So it doesn't mean social connection doesn't mean all the people. Positive mood improving activities. There's research around this that shows how negative emotions, so negative feelings, have an impact on our physiology. So when we experience, so that means like what's going on in your body, right? The things that we're talking about with stress, sort of those physical manifestations, positive emotions have an undoing effect on that, right? So it's like, oh, well, why wouldn't I want to do that more, right? So encouraging that, whatever that looks like, right? Healthy eating and drinking. This is not, I mean, you guys are getting the personal trainer, but it's not like that. This is just about like, yeah, it makes sense to eat healthier. However, that's not what this is. This is understanding how hydration impacts how we feel. When our mood is lousy because we're not putting good things into our body or we're not eating at all, right? That impacts our mood. So it's just about understanding that relationship. It's not about like, let's look at what you're eating and, change that. No, it's not that. Sleep, you guys, if there was one thing that we could single-handedly do to address stress naturally, it would be sleep. And I won't go into that. Just know that there is an entirely like amazing biochemical process that happens when we sleep, and it mitigates stress. It eases the effects of, stress on our bodies. And I also recognize sleep is not easy. It's not something we can just do, right? And sometimes people sleep too much, right? So it's not like, sleep is the one thing that we can just automatically turn to, right? There's a lot of reasons for that. So this could look like talking about sleep hygiene, right? Not necessarily giving the recommendations, which, by the way, I didn't make this up. It's 9 to 10 hours. So I want to know who is sleeping for 9 to 10 hours besides my son. See that? Scott's like, no, no, not me. Right. And then I also have had some people and they're like, yeah, I actually sleep that every night. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I'm pretty sure 8 hours I need out of the bed. Like I'm just in pain. I need out. Like I can't be laying there for 10 hours, right? There's things to do. Yeah. Oh wow, 3 to 4 hours. Gosh, yeah. So we're tracking sleep is important. We know. We also, there's a lot of reasons why we can't get sleep. So I recognize that. I appreciate that. Exercise, as I mentioned, you guys, this is just about moving our bodies. This is not go to the gym. This is what are you doing to move your body? There's a huge connection between movement and processing emotions, being able to process, problem solve, process thoughts. Back to that example of like the toe tapping, feeling fidgety. So that's your body saying, I need to move. And I've heard the saying, like, if you want to figure something out or you want to problem solve, just go up a flight of stairs. That's why there is a connection that happens in our brains with our bodies that allows us to process more effectively when we're moving. And then finally, relaxation is anything that can help you calm your mind and body so that two things, maybe you can think a little more effectively, right? Maybe this is going to help with problem solving, or relaxation for just clearing your mind. You don't want to think. You don't want anything going on in your brain, right? That's fine too. So it can go either way, right? Sometimes I was always talking about relaxation as a way to, be more mindful and think about things. No, sometimes it's okay to turn everything off if you're able to do that, right? Okay. Asking questions to get this insight. I'm not gonna go through these questions, you guys. As I mentioned, it's all online. This is just to give you again more insight around any of those areas. Now, what I didn't mention about step 4, there's an opportunity to share your own experiences, right? Or potential things that you think might be helpful. I think there's a lot of good that can do, and I also recognize as somebody that loves to share that it can become about you, right? If we start sharing about ourselves, then now it's no longer about this other person. That's why we wait towards the end of the conversation to share, and that's really important. And this can look like, um, you mentioned you'd like to relax more, you're having a hard time relaxing. Something that's really worked well for me is using the Calm app, right? Sort of like these little kind of guided meditations. And if you've got these little pockets of time, you can just do those. And that's really helped me. That's an example of a way to share something that you think would be helpful. Like we probably wouldn't want to do that in step 3. Step 4 would be a good place to do that. Okay. Step 5. So up to this point, like I said, you have the opportunity at any point in time to share resources that could come up anywhere. Even though it says like, well, it doesn't really say that, but step 5 is sort of like where the resources pop up. That can be anywhere. And, you may or may not have added to strengths, and that's fine. Maybe you're like, nope, we actually talked about strengths and that was good. Totally fine. So step 5 is where we're going to circle the wagons back. We're only summarizing just a few key things that we talked about, right? This isn't like we got to go back over all the things. And no, this is just like checking in. So what I hear you say is that, you're having a hard time right now at work and, whatever that situation looks like, right? Highlighting whatever strengths came up, right? As a way to, again, get them thinking about self-efficacy. Not that we're necessarily talking about self-efficacy, but again, to think about like the belief in their abilities and just sort of checking in with that. Like, do I have that right? Is there anything else you wanted to add to that? Right? Just a few things. And even if that doesn't feel natural, that's fine. Just sort of summarizing in some way, shape, or form. You're invested in this conversation as well. And then drawing out whatever action steps came up. And hopefully they came up. And maybe it is a little more work on our part to sort of help identify those. But again, they're not coming from us, right? So I use the example of taking a walk around the building. Something so simple, an action step is not a goal. So an action step needs to be something so simple that if they didn't do it, it would be ridiculous, right? And so a great action step with the example that I'm using is, so something that was important to you before was taking a walk on your break or on your lunchtime. And that was a great way to help you process, things that were on your mind, some of the stress that you're feeling, process emotions. Is that something that you could start doing? And in my mind, an action step should be soon, like not by next week, take that walk, right? It's like, can you do this today? Or does that sound doable for you in the next day or so? Like not, no, maybe next week, right? So again, making sure this is their idea and not yours, because I can come up with so many action steps for everyone, right? It's like, oh, I have something for you. I know exactly what you need right now. This is going to help. So this needs to be their idea. So it needs to be something that came out when we're asking about, what are you doing right now to cope? And they're like, well, I used to do this. I'm not doing it right now. That's a great opportunity to find an action step, right? But an action step, again, being so small, if they're like, I used to go to the gym, be like, well, is there something else that you have done before for movement or exercise that might feel a little bit easier right now? Maybe not quite as challenging as going to the gym, right? So the point of the action step, again, to start encouraging active coping, but also to demonstrate that belief in their abilities. Like, I can do this. Like, I just did this little tiny action step. I'm going to keep doing this action step until I feel like I can do more. Now, we don't talk about this in terms of like following up. There's not a like, follow up with this person. It might not feel, maybe you're going to see this person anyway, so it doesn't feel like you would need to follow up. I think it's great to, ask, is it okay if I follow up? If it's not somebody that you're talking to consistently, you are not the accountability coach or the life coach. This is really just about like, hey, we had this conversation. I just want to check back in with you, right? Again, doing the, not that it's a non-clinical, we're not coaching. We're just like, hey, I care about you. And, how can I be there to support you? Okay. I think that's everything. I'm like thinking I'm missing something. Okay, so your challenge, I'll think about it here in a second as you guys are wrapping up. Your challenge is to think a little bit more about who you would like to check in with if you have a person. And as I mentioned, there is an option to get a certificate. And you don't have to do it right now. If you go on and register, you can always go do the certificate at the end of module 5, and that will make sense when you log on there. It's the tiniest of quizzes, and then you get a certificate. If you're having problems getting a certificate, just email me, which you can do that at grit@uccs.edu. We have, and so the continuing education, it depends. We don't offer it as that, but if your organization, um, would consider that. I know some folks have been able to do that. So it's really just a matter of checking in with them to see if that could be considered as continuing education. Yeah, I can put my email in the chat. Absolutely. And so we have additional tracks, you guys. Oops, I'll just stick it in there. We have additional tracks as well. I mentioned we just released Grit Teen, so that was my summer project. And very similar to Grit, regular Grit, except designed more towards addressing stress in teens and building awareness around that, as well as how teens can effectively support each other, sort of what to do when they feel like they're not sure what to do, if that makes sense, when they're trying to talk to somebody, talk to a friend, and not entirely sure what they should be doing. So there's some insight around that. We also have 4 other tracks, and these are all based around sort of those organizational challenges. So we have Grit Lead, which is our leadership and small business track. We have Grit Serve, which is our military and first responder track. Grit for Ed is our educators track, and Grit for Health is our healthcare workers track. We are also developing Grit Care, which is specifically for professional and non-professional caregivers. So all that to say, those tracks will only take you like an hour maybe at the most to do if you really wanted to read everything. So those are just additional, there's additional resources, insight around some of those challenges. And I think that's everything I have. I'm thinking if I forgot, so I'm sure I'll be awake at 2 a.m. and that's when I'll remember you guys.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Shaw. That was such great information. I really appreciate it. I know personally, it's always a good reminder that we all have strengths and that we can always build on those. So thanks again. And families, let's give another big round of applause for Dr. Lauren
Thank
Shaw.
you. Thank you so much, everyone. This was such a great group. I love this group. You guys were amazing, and I really appreciate the participation and engagement.